Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Business Incorporated, coming to you live from our Lagos studios. I'm Chimize Obi Iwago. On the show today, African leaders meet in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, to sign historic free trade deal. IMF sees brighter future for Liberia's economy after a very difficult period. Plus, Dangote Cement gets go-ahead to issue $833 million local currency bonds. Let's get the show started now with the markets. And here in Africa, only Nigeria's index was down at intraday 0.06%. Both JSE index in South Africa and Egypt were both up 0.35% apiece. Kenya closed up 1.05% on Tuesday. And in the Middle East, most of the markets were up except Qatar, which dropped 1.16%. Abu Dhabi was up 0.91%, Dubai was up 0.75%, and Saudi was up 0.27%. Let's move now to the U.S. West Stock Index. Futures were little changed ahead of Wednesday's open as investors waited for an all-important meeting by the U.S. Federal Reserve. Around 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time, Dow futures traded flat, indicating a gain of 25.73 points at the open. Nasdaq 100 futures pointed to slight losses, while S&P 500 futures tipped a small gain at the open. Wednesday will see the conclusion of a two-day meeting by the Fed, where the Federal Open Market Committee will release its latest interest rate decision and give comments on the economy at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The meeting will be followed by a news conference, which will be headed up for the first time by the newly appointed Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Market watchers will also be paying close attention to see if the central bank comments on key topics such as inflation, the state of the U.S. economy, and politics. While trade is a big subject shaking up markets as of late, the Fed may not choose to touch upon the topic of potential trade wars in order to keep markets at bay. And the markets in Asia finished mixed today, with investors cautious ahead of an expected Fed rate hike. The Fed kicked off its two-day meeting on Tuesday and is expected to raise rates for the first time this year at the end of its meeting. Seoul's Kospi closed little change after hovering slightly above the flat line earlier in the day. The benchmark shed 0.02% to close at 2,484.97, and the junior Kosdaq gave up early gains to slip 0.54%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was flat. Mainland markets reversed early gains to close lower. The Shanghai Composite eased 0.27% to end at 3,281.59, and the smaller Shenzhen Composite slid 0.73% to close at 1,858.61. Over in Sydney, the S&P ASX 200 drifted higher by 0.23% to close at 5,950 points. Markets in Japan were closed on Wednesday for the vernal equinox. And back here in Africa, the company with the largest market capitalization in Nigeria, Dangote Cement, has received the go-ahead from regulators to issue 300 billion naira, which is about $833 million in local currency bonds, as it seeks to fund expansion and refinance debt. The debt will be issued over 3 years in tranches of 50 billion naira each. The Group Chief Financial Officer of Dangote Cement, Mr. Brian Egan, also confirms that the company is also considering the sale of Eurobonds to boost its funding. Dangote is planning to spend $350 million on capital projects this year, including the building of export facilities at Nigeria's seaports, which will see it begin shipments of clinker and cement to neighboring West African countries. And the International Monetary Fund is optimistic about Liberia's economy, which appears poised for recovery following a very difficult period over the last 5 years. The Ebola crisis, combined with a large decrease in export prices, took its toll on the country's economy as growth bottomed out in 2016 at minus 1.6% before increasing to about 2.5% in 2017. But in spite of all the challenges Liberia has been through, the IMF, which just concluded its Article 4 visit to the country, believes a peaceful political transition will offer support to the recovery of the domestic economy, especially agriculture and service sectors, through improved consumer and investor confidence. While the IMF, the team supports the George Weah-led administration's adoption of a strongly pro-poor agenda, the fund advises the government to also consider adopting a comprehensive program to clear domestic arrears and prevent the emergence of new ones. And in Ghana, cocoa farmers are full of smiles at the moment as the government makes a U-turn from its earlier announcement that will be cutting their pay because of a decline in global prices. The change of plan in the world's second biggest producer comes after the finance ministry said in January that Ghana cannot continue to subsidize farmers' pay to keep them at the level they were at before prices slumped more than 25%. Ghana's Agriculture Minister Owuse Afriyie-Akoto says government will rather make savings through other means. Ghana Cocoa Board had announced in February that it is losing the equivalent of about $600 for every metric ton of the 850,000 tons that it is purchasing this season until September. The country has kept prices unchanged since setting producer pay at the equivalent of 7,600 cedis, or about $1,720 per ton in October 2016. And African leaders meeting in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, are expected to sign a historic free trade deal that would create a liberalized market for goods and services similar to the EU. But the absence of Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, the leader Africa's biggest economy, could be seen to water down the agreement.
Of integration for this great continent.
African heads of state and business leaders from across the continent are gathered in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, ahead of a historic signing of the African Continental Free Trade Area, an agreement that would pave the way for continental commerce. Meeting business